that will give them some interesting matchups. Of course, the one thing the Warriors will have is home court advantage against every single team in the East. These trashy Warriors that were like awful and Bob Myers should be fired, better record than every other team in the East, except Miami, where they got the same record, but they still managed to beat them in Miami without Steph Curry. Yeah, so I'm looking pretty good here. So that one of the last pieces I wrote at Forbes was my preseason preview, and I said top 4 seed, 50 wins, and if everyone's healthy, a shot at title. Now I'm feeling really good about this. Obviously, given where they are now. I think what's really interesting though is I didn't expect the start that they had, and to have done that, to have achieved all that, 53 wins, 3rd seed. Only 11 minutes played together for Steph, Clay, and Dre. I would not have predicted that. So I think they have been much better than I thought they would when they've been healthy. And the question now is like, can they remain healthy throughout the playoffs? Because I think if they can, when they were healthy, they had the best record in the league without Clay. So basically, if Curry and Green are healthy, I think they've got a real legit chance at a title. And I suppose one thing about borrowing your slogan of gold-blooded, I mean, act like it then. None of this, Phoenix are the best team, or, no one's picking us to come out of the West, or, everyone's, all right, No, like, come on, where's Leandro? Someone needs to channel Leandro Barbosa. This team is really, really, really good when they're healthy and complete. And, I can't see anyone in the West knocking them out if those 3 guys are healthy and everyone else is reasonably healthy. Now you get to the finals, that's there are some threats there, but if you're gonna go around saying gold-blooded, you've got to act like it. That's my message.
Yeah, I was a little bit lower, but I definitely got some lessons taught this season. The dynasty rose back like the Jesus Easter miracle. They came out after a couple seasons of death. And man, Clay, they said on the broadcast last night, was averaging over 30 points over the last 5 games of the regular season. And, we were talking about it before the video started. That was one of the lowest stress playoff wins I can remember seeing, even during the peak dynasty days. Now, I know it's just 1 game, but I'm feeling pretty good about the Warriors' chances and your gold-bloodedness. You saw it coming before I did, man. If the core is good to go, then the team is good to go. And there are some guys like Gary Payton had that huge block on Jokic, the sort of beginning half of the game there. Wiggins did his thing. I don't know if he got his allocation of 17 points or not, but it was really close. And, his aggression and rebounding came in so big. And the other thing is, guys, Jordan Poole might be one of the big core guys. I don't know how many max contracts they can get on one team, but that kid is playing his way into a big contract, man. And he is looking, at least, 1 game and part of a season into this campaign, he's looking like a legitimate piece alongside Steph and Clay. With those 3 guys in your backcourt and Draymond Green, there's a lot of really exciting lineups. And, they put Wiggins in with those 4, and they just buried the Nuggets in the 3rd quarter last night. So I'm over the moon, man. Expectations well exceeded.
Yeah, I definitely had them in that 4 to 6 range, just because I assumed that. I just figured, with the injuries and, just getting those new role players in there, I figured it would just take some time to gel. And also that, Steve Kerr's teams since the 73 win season just have not been into quote unquote chasing wins. They've been just more about, let's get right for the playoffs, let's get healthy and we'll see what happens. And that earlier stretch in the season when, they were just destroying teams left and right without Clay. And I thought to myself, okay, like if they can keep this defense going, and just get any kind of offensive firepower at all, like that's what really surprised me was how good the defense was, And so when that weird patch the middle towards latter half of the season happened, and I realized that they weren't getting caught. Like they were still the number 3 seed and had like the 3rd best record in all of the NBA. And to kind of echo what I said from the very beginning, that, you know, although we're oftentimes measuring the Warriors against the perfect imagination of what the Warriors could be, they're not actually playing the imaginary Warriors. They're playing like, you know, the other teams, most of them who suck. So if they can just beat those teams, they're all right. And they've been doing a pretty good job at that, which is funny because looking at the matchup in this first round, you would think on paper, this would be a matchup that a lot of fans would be like, oh no, we may not want to play the Nuggets because they got this MVP big man. And the huge cry against the Warriors, franchise big brains was, how can you not add another big man to this roster? And, you know, Nikola Jokic, I'm looking at stats right now, had a heck of a game. You know, he had 25 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, shot almost 50% from the field, 3 steals. You know, but he was a -19 in the plus minus. And they also had Boogie Cousins come off the bench, 7 points, 10 minutes. He gets ejected. Like Boogie Cousins and Jokic should be 2 guys who should give the Warriors some trouble, and the Warriors completely destroyed them. So what do you guys think about that whole we need a big man angst thing if we don't even have Wiseman and no one cares? We still got an easy win.
So, I mean, I at the beginning of the season, I thought the 15th spot should go to a big man. I was kind of interested in whether Marc Gasol, having left the NBA, and his retirement was worded in a way that he might come back. It was the right opportunity, and I thought, well, that would be really interesting. Kevin Love was another, is he going to get bought out kind of candidate? But then they took off, and the defense was so good. And what was really interesting, so first of all, the defense is this good because Draymond Green has decided that he is going to play like Draymond Green from the dynasty days, and that is the core of it. So, we've had these discussions before about what kind of players do they add, and ultimately, if you're going to go Draymond Green at 5, which they're always going to do when the chips are down, how much really do you need? So Draymond Green at 5 has been, he's been superb, and the defense tailed off obviously when he got injured, and as soon as he got back up to speed, they looked all right again. They almost beat the Suns without Steph Curry, which we're all supposed to be scared of Chris Paul in the playoffs now. I understand, but I'm not so sure. But yeah, so Dre's there. Probably the biggest surprise this season was Kevon Looney playing 82 games. I mean, and he's been brilliant. So. I think they're all right in that space. The other bit that was really interesting to me, the other players really interesting to me in this context, was Otto Porter, because he came in big wing. Actually, he's basically a stretch 5 now in terms of, he's got the rebounding, he's got the intelligence, and he's got the shooting. So between them, they've kind of made it work. Obviously, they expected Wiseman. They had that 15th spot. They could have done something if they wanted to, but who were they going to sign when you get to the buyout season? There was no one there, no one available who would have made a difference, and crucially that Steve Kerr would have played. So all you'd be doing is cutting someone who Steve Kerr does play to have someone sat at the end of the bench. What's the point in that? So really, I think it's all down to Draymond Green, as it always has been with this team when it comes to guarding big guys and essentially running guys off the floor. And just like Jokic, the thing about the reason he's going to be the MVP and deserving MVP this season, in my view, is because his help, he literally has no help because Jamal Murray and Michael Porter are injured. Aaron Gordon's been another disappointment again, I would say, in terms of what they expected. And then Austin Rivers is 5th in minutes on that team. It is Jokic and no one else pretty much. So, all respect to him. But, there's only so much you can do. And the Warriors have a complete team. And that's why they're winning, and that's why they always used to win. Strength in numbers, and was the classic slogan. But yeah, all comes back to Draymond Green really when it comes down to it, in my view, and he's been fantastic.
So I hope you're not saying that this is going to be another asterisk season, because it's going to say, well, if the Nuggets had Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, the Warriors would have never won.
Oh yeah, it's always going to be an asterisk season if the Warriors win. If they lose, it won't be, of course.
Well, the other when you're talking about the bigs too. There was a guy like Marquise Chris who seemed like it seemed like it would have made sense to get him on the team over a guy like Beal. And Belly struggled this season more frequently than he thrived. But Kerr seems to trust him a lot more than he trusts Kuminga. And some of the metrics sort of support that. Kuminga is a fantastic player, but he still plays rookie defense. And Kerr, I think probably rightly, prioritizes the sort of veteran savvy, people knowing where to go. And once the defense starts rotating, you got to have all the strings pulling on each other. But I think Patrick's right too, that it's funny to keep revisiting it, because the time to really get a big man was the off season. You know, the sort of trade deadline chatter and the buyout market stuff is just like a joke. No one wants Enes Kanter, except Enes Kanter. Like that's not going to be a solution at all. So the Warriors made some educated guesses. You know, obviously I agree that Wiseman was a part of that plan, for better or worse. But, you know, the Warriors historically, and this is sort of a recent trend in the playoffs, is the teams tend to go smaller in the playoffs. And I think that's what happened with Boogie. Was looking pretty good for a second. Jokic, you know, he got stifled by Draymond and to a lesser extent Kevon Looney, but the real minus was when we started going small in the second half. And, you know, I don't know if Kerr meant to intentionally lean on it that heavily right away, but one of the things I wrote about earlier in the season was, you know, this team versus other rosters, this team has sort of been practicing for the small ball switch all season, because they haven't had a traditional big. There is no Weissman to take off the thing. There's no Zaza Pachulia to bump out of the rotation. It's Looney and Draymond, some Bjelica if you have to, and then some small ball with Porter or even Wiggins. These are lineups that are going to work in the playoffs as long as the defense holds up. And I think that's one thing that Draymond really prides himself on, is, you know, that we made fun of LeBron for it for years, but if you have a playoff switch, it buys you a whole lot of slack. And I think that especially with the health concerns, you know, and that's a big part of the Nuggets thing, man. I mean, asterisk or not, they're missing a lot of really big contracts for them, and that matters so much. So for them to get past the Warriors, it's going to take a miracle. Now we've got another game here. I know Malone is going to make some adjustments, and I don't think that they're going to do as good of a job all the time. But one thing I was really struck by is looking at the Nuggets, like they're worse at every position. Like they don't have anybody to cover Steph. They don't have anybody to cover Jordan Poole. They don't have anybody to even cover Andrew Wiggins. You know, Looney is stout enough to handle the defensive pressure of a big guy like Cousins and Jokic, and then fast enough to run down him, where you see Jokic doing like the fat dad run, where his like arms are working harder than his body. Like they've got some strategic concerns over there, and it really looks to me like the Warriors made the right call. You know, and one of the things that we've spoken about before is that the Warriors are deep into their contingencies. You know, once Kevin Durant left, they sort of like, well, we'll hold this max spot. Oh, here's Wiggins. We'll get him in a draft pick. It turned out to be Kuminga, I believe. And then at that point, and I think even Bob Myers or maybe Joey Lightyears said it, is like, you know, if our core guys aren't enough, then like that's on them, kind of. Like we feel like the core of this roster can contend for a title, and historically it is enough. Like, you know, trading out Leandro Barbosa for Jordan Poole matters a lot more than trading out Zaza Pachulia for Bjelica.
So yeah, just like on Jordan Poole, I mean, that's the X factor here, right? So all of a sudden you've got Steph, Clay, and Jordan Poole who can all destroy you from the perimeter, and like his ball handling, his creativity is amazing. He's come on so far. It's kind of like if they traded for Beal, what you would be expecting to happen, right? You know, so I'm not saying he's as good as Beal at this point, you know, and you know Beal's won scoring titles and things like that. Although this season, obviously, that would not have been a good move because he's been injured. But like that was the appeal of that. Another dynamic scorer who could take some of the load off Steph, who could, you know, do some of that, get into the teeth of the defense, and basically score for you. But you haven't had to give up every other asset in the process to get that. You've developed that player on your roster, and there is like that Steph, Clay, Jordan Poole, Wiggins in that particular instance, and Green lineup that they played last night. That just blew them off the floor, right? But there's so many versions of that you can play, right? If you're doing a close game, last few minutes, you can swap on Andre Iguodala in for Wiggins. if you've got a real problem with a big guy, you can have Looney in there instead of Wiggins, you know, but there's like loads of mixing and matching you can do. If you need some dynamism, some power, you can stick Kuminga in there. Like the depth and the versatility and the options they've got in any kind to get through this playoff run which is what they were really aiming for, I think, when they decided, do we just add another big or not? You know, that's what gets you through a series of playoff series. So it's in direct contrast to Nuggets, as you said, like they basically got no wings who can defend anyone, no one who can defend anyone on the perimeter. It's Aaron Gordon, but you know, as I say, he's not been that great. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's a real contrast between styles, and it's pretty clear which one's going to win this series. Now, if the Nuggets had Murray, if they had Porter, it would be a lot closer. But I still think the versatility that the Warriors have put on their roster in terms of lots of these interchangeable pieces is why they're there. And just one final point on that 15th spot, going back to what you were saying about the preseason, what they could have done in preseason, that meant no Gary Payton. And actually, he has been unbelievable. He's been more important. He's been better at playing the big man role than a lot of the big men people were talking about at the trade deadline. Oh, can you get this guy? Like, you know, none of those guys would be dunking. That dunk on Kelly Oubre early on in the season just said it meant so much. It was like, you know what, this guy is better than you. And you know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be. He's a good guy, Kelly Oubre, but like, it really said something about the roster, the way they built the roster over the summer, and what they had going forward. So, like, who are you going to get rid of? Bjelica would have been the guy for a long time. I definitely. But what's been really interesting, Bjelica, is when he plays next to Draymond Green, he's really good. When he plays not next to Draymond Green, he's like awful. And you know, so he was good for the first bit of the season, or useful for the first bit of the season, terrible for 3 months, and now he's actually producing, spreading the floor. But again, it goes back to the defense matchups, which is what playoffs are about. Is he going to be so useful against a team like Memphis? Probably not. That's probably where you might see Kuminga get a few more minutes, because he's, you know, got the. You might want to
I thought they were getting swept by the Timberwolves.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. You can't be a dynasty until you've actually won. Let's be generous, right? You should try and win a playoff series before you call yourself a dynasty. I mean, I love those guys. They're great fun, and like, but that was like, come on, man, come on, Dylan. It's like, what are you?
Okay, so this is where again my frustration has been with you know, some of the more hand-wringy among us in Dub Nation, where it's just this like, they just assume the best out of every other team and the worst out of our team, and we're assuming these things from teams who have never done it. And I mean, I was talking to you know, Nate the other day. He says, you know, the Denver's are, you know, a fantastic 6 seed, a great story, but can you name me the 6 seed from the 2001 Western Conference playoff bracket? No one cares. You know what I mean? And there's so many teams that, you know, in the moment we look at and go, oh wow, like, you know, if these T-Mac and Yao Rockets ever get it together, you're like, wow, like what could be? And they never, you know, made it to the finals. There's something about having shown your work and done the work before, that the Warriors have done so consistently over the last decade or so, that is really getting Spurs like, where you know that if they have any health at all, they're going to be in contention every year if they're healthy. And now that they've added these new pieces, because I remember Draymond Green before the season was saying that it's never been done to, you know, win now while developing. Well, I would disagree with that, because Kawhi Leonard got developed while the Spurs were winning now. You know what I mean? Tony Parker got developed while the Spurs were winning now. So I think that's the one model you can point to. And that's where I just am so thrilled with guys like Jordan Poole. I mean, what Jordan Poole did last night, I think he has like his first 6 shots or something like that. And like everything he took was like, he felt so confident and so comfortable, and the floor was so spaced that after a while you were like, wait a minute, this guy could go for 50. And we've got Klay Thompson and Steph Curry on the floor. And I know the story was supposed to be Steph Curry's, you know, grand return coming off the bench. And he, you know, he looked pretty much like Steph, a little short in some of his shots, of course, from the rest, but he looked like Steph. But the story was like, oh no, this team can't guard Jordan Poole. Like once you get to that level, now it's reminding me of how it was with Kevin Durant, when it was like, okay, this guy is so good on his own. And the warring machine that is the Warriors offense, everyone can eat, but if this guy's by himself, he's going to destroy you. It's like, if Jordan Poole is that kind of player where you can't ever guard him alone on an island, like there's no way you can guard the Warriors. And now you got Andrew Wiggins just coasting to 16 points every night. You're like, okay, this no way to stop this team. Like you can't beat them. And so going forward, that's where I wonder where the Kuminga minutes could come from. I mean, even JTA minutes. Like there are certain teams in certain moments where you know those guys are going to do their thing. And I'm just waiting, each time, each game, each opportunity to see who pops up. Gary Payton, too, of course, going to do his thing. Like, there's so many good guys on this roster. And yet we had people trying to decapitate Bob Myers halfway through the season and being like, you built a trash team. Like, this team is as Doug would say, deeper than a submarine.
Yeah, and it was like it's like that Hobby Lobby mom poster about, you wouldn't dig up a plant and check its roots before it developed. Like, I feel like that's kind of where the Warriors team is at, man. It's like, the Draymond Green is a second rounder, Jordan Poole is a second rounder. These are the sort of development wins that you need to really bridge the gap. And the Warriors stuck with their plan, for better or worse, as rocky as it looked. They really believed in what they were doing. And like, I also think as far as the internet hand wringing goes, Daniel, I think a lot of people only see like what's possible. I honestly think if Bob Myers could have traded Kuminga and Moody for who's the guy on the Raptors?
Let's go Siakam.
Siakam, right. A lot of people were clamoring for a quote unquote trade like that. And, I don't think that you can say that Bob Myers wouldn't have done that trade. I just think it's not there, and it was the same thing where, I think they sort of engaged a little bit on a Bradley Beal trade and then didn't like the cost. These guys are not looking. It's just, unless the deal improves your current chances or significantly alters the future, why would you sell out on your current approach, especially before you've seen it actually have a chance to fly? And I think you, Daniel, believed more than a lot of people out there that Clay coming back would heal things. And, it's funny because some of that is true. Clay looking lethal is a huge deal. But a lot of it too is the internal development, like Jordan Poole has no right to be this good. Gary Payton barely made the team. All the vets wanted Avery Bradley, who wasted away in Los Angeles all season. You just don't know, so you may as well stick with the plan and see what happens. But as far as the hand wringing goes, I think it's fair to second guess stuff, but I don't think that people really are clear on what's possible versus what's imaginable. Like, I can imagine all sorts of trades that make the team a lot better, but without trade override on, you can't do stuff like that.
Well, how come they just give the benefit of the doubt to people who've never done it? That's my question. Like, if you want to criticize and be skeptical of the Warriors, fine. But I need you to criticize and be skeptical of everybody else. Like, people were literally saying Memphis was on another tier than the Golden State Warriors. A different tier than the Warriors. Like, okay, look, I love the Grizzlies. They're irritating as hell. Their bench is the loudest bench I've ever heard in my life. They scream for everything. I love it. Good camaraderie, great fan base. They haven't done anything. So to elevate them up, and then you say, okay, the Phoenix Suns. Look, Phoenix has had a fantastic season. They're defending Western Conference champions. Nice team, really nice team. The Warriors aren't scared of the Phoenix Suns. And how many times throughout history have we seen like, oh, Phoenix Suns had a great regular season. Oh my God, they got Steve Nash. They got Amari Stoudemire. Oh, watch out, everybody. Okay.
Oh my God, that was robbed.
Okay, they got robbed. They got robbed. I'll give that. Charles Barkley. The Charles Barkley Suns. They got Dan Marley. Everybody, watch out. Like, they're never going to win a championship. How many decades will Phoenix do this to people? Stop believing in them. I'm sorry. I go crazy.
No, but who's the THT guy on the Lakers? That was a guy who looked great, and a lot of people pointed to exactly him. It's like, see, this is the kind of guy the Warriors should be getting. And meanwhile, Kayvon Looney, the guy that nobody really cared about for a long time, ends up starting for the team all season and doing fantastic. Like, it's pretty impressive to me how good the Warriors have been. And I know it's just one game and it's a long playoff series, but man, there's some real grass is greener stuff that goes on out there.
Well, how would you rank the current death lineup? I guess we haven't come up with a name for it yet, but the Poole, the Clay, Steph, Wiggins, Draymond lineup, like, how lethal is that in the history of Warriors lineups? Where are we ranking that?
Well, that's a tough one, because what we haven't seen is what happened, like defensively, what happened. So the original death lineup with Harrison Barnes, in 2015 was pretty good. You helped, absolutely part of winning that title, but they were really good defensively. Obviously, the Hamptons Five, as they became known, was like that's the greatest lineup that's ever been put on a basketball court, as far as I'm concerned. Like, the level of talent there was just insane, especially in 2017 when Iguodala was still kind of at the peak of it. But I think, offensively, this is as explosive potentially as that lineup. The question is, like, defensively, it is smaller, but the NBA has got smaller. So, how does that play out? Steph's been playing great defense. Clay, obviously, I mean, he has been fantastic coming back off those injuries, but we still don't quite know defensively what he's going to be. So, yeah, it's up there, definitely, potentially. But as I say, like, there's a load of different combinations you can throw out in that fifth spot, depending on what you need against, and who you're playing. And I mean, just actually to something Dubby said, like the contract situation with that lineup, Poole is now going to get, clearly he's going to get paid, right? And he deserves to get paid. So, I wrote something for the HQ earlier in the year, which they like, don't worry about it. It'll work itself out. I still hold to that, but I will say I had not anticipated Poole being quite this good now. But it's if they win a championship, if they are as good as the other lineup, we've seen it. They paid Andre Iguodala. They paid him more than they wanted to pay him in 2017 to keep that lineup together. They're probably going to end up doing that with Poole and Wiggins, because it's only really 1 year before then, like, Clay's contract comes off, the CBA, there's the CBA runs out and you start negotiating a new CBA with an enormous TV deal. So, I think a lot of the worry around that is overblown. And if that's the lineup that they can run out, with Kuminga also somewhere in the mix, because next season, he's going to be next season, what Poole's done this season, that I think is where you're expecting Kuminga potentially to take that big leap, in terms of, like, he is really close, he is really good, or this early. So give him an off season, give him more time, because you probably won't have quite the depth in those forward spots behind Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins. So you've got, like, it's really weird because they've actually got multiple death lineups in a way that they can run out.
Do you really
and
think
that is a new thing, I think.
But as far as the salary stuff goes, and I apologize, Patrick, because I just rely on you to tell me what's realistic and what's not. Do you really think they would give Poole something close to a max contract and bring everybody back? So
yeah, because I don't think they're going to give Wiggins 35 million. Apologies, Daniel. Apologies for that stray in the article. Do you remember? But yeah, I don't, like, no one's going to give after the second half of the season. I don't see anyone giving him 35 million. They always find a way out of these things. The interesting thing was what Bob Myers said when I asked him about basically asked him the 400 million question last year. And he said, I'd probably lose my job, or what's the effect? I'd probably lose my job if we paid 400 million or something like that and we didn't win a title. So, like, if they flame out, then, they're going to bring the changes. But if this looks like a legitimate lineup for the next, few years, I don't think they're going to cheap out. Now, that might mean they've got to make other decisions elsewhere on the roster about some of the kind of mid-sized contracts they might have.
Wiseman.
Well, Wiseman, Looney, Payton, like, how much are you giving those guys? But as I say, like, it is really 1 year you're worried about. It's not even next season, because next season they're under contract anyway. Poole's under contract as rookie year, last year of his rookie scale. So then it's an extension beyond that. You can do them this summer, obviously. Extension beyond that, and it's literally 1 year until the whole system potentially gets a big reset. And by the way, Klay Thompson comes off, because, like, as great as Klay is, I actually wrote well before he got just 6 months before he got injured, when he was still Klay Thompson. Slightly sacrilegious, I know. But, like, do you really want to give him $190 million over 5 years? Because the last 2 years of that contract are going to be enormous. Like, 40 million he's going to get next year and 43 million the year after. Like, he's not going to re-sign at 43 million, 45 million, unless the cap explodes and then kind of continues on. So like and throughout the kind of history of their salary cap, like everyone is same kind of thing. Everyone kind of wrings their hands, they can't afford it, they can't afford it, they can't afford it, and every time they find a way out of it, and it's usually by squeezing the mid-sized bit if that's where they need to do it. But yeah, let's see what happens. I mean, we've got to get through. Let's see what happens in this playoff run. Let's see how these guys do. It's only been one game. Wiggins can go hot and cold. Poole can go hot and cold. That's why it's great you have all these other options. But you've got the way it's set up, and this is the whole appeal, I think, of trying to develop while win, is you've got some core guys on big contracts, and then you've got some young guys on rookie scale contracts who can contribute. And that is the thing that kind of puts you over the top, as it were, while you're paying these big contracts. And then it evens out the other way. They come off the rookie scale contracts onto the extensions, and the other guys maybe take a little bit less, like the Spurs did at the end of their run. Like, what was Tony Parker signing for? What was Tim Duncan signing for? What was Manu Ginobili signing for? So that's the way you keep this going, and that's why I think that was a legitimate path for them to try. And I think what we're seeing now is like it's going to get really expensive. But look, they made those comments in light of an 8 seed season where they lost in the play-in, and Chase Center had been closed, and they actually lost money. They lost the operating profit was reportedly lower, according to my old friends at Forbes. Whereas this season, it's been open all season. Everyone's been going there. Like, concerts been going on. That place is they're rolling in money. There are ways they can do this. And by the way, the NBA is back, right? So the salary cap for next season has already risen beyond the projections because the NBA is back and people are kind of flocking in. So, it's like there's a temporary glitch, right, of 1 year that you've got to worry about. But I think if it comes down to like, well, let's trade Jordan Poole, or let's trade Andrew Wiggins, or let Andrew Wiggins walk for nothing, when their core pieces of their basically new death line, or one of their new death lineups, there's kind of multiple weapons of mass destruction here. Like, what are you going to do? Joe Laker really going to do that? No, he's going to write the check. That's what he's done before. And I really think that it just feels to me, if these guys really are a title contending lineup, they win a title this year, or they get real close. Back to because it's also not next season, right? That's the thing. They've got another season to do it. They've got 2 chances basically to win it before they actually have to worry about this.
And back to Daniel's point too, like, if you invest in your main core guys and they play well, you don't give a damn about the mid-level exception. Like, people can complain about not using it, and I certainly did that because it seemed like, and that's someone like Batum. He certainly would have helped the team this season, but it's hard to argue that Porter didn't at least do as well for a fraction of the cost. Like, but this is Daniel's point, is like, none of that stuff matters. Like, if your team is contending with a huge top heavy roster, who cares about the MLE?
But I think that's the part that I kind of saw back from those old teams, like the Bulls. You know what I mean? It was like you had like your death lineup, so to speak. Yeah, Jordan, Pippen, Kukoc, Harper. You could put Kerr out there if you want to, Robin, whoever it was. But there were so many guys in that roster you look at and you'd be like, wait, I forgot Bill Whittington was on that team? Or like, who's this guy? Oh my gosh, so there's so many names in there that you just wouldn't think about. But they played, their role in the regular season. But at the end of the day, it was like, give Michael the ball. You know what I mean? Get the hell out the way. So when you have those caliber of guys, and then you look at teams like Utah, who, I mean, Dr. Tom and I have been saying for years that you can't trust them, you can't believe them. And I think there was this idea that, just a bunch of guys who can, play basketball really well together, but they're not the 04 Pistons. You know what I mean? Like, who was the man on that team? Well, it's like they were all kind of the man. Chauncey, Sheed, all those guys, Ben Wallace. None of them were like a superstar caliber, but playing together, the synergy was off the charts. I don't see that for most teams except for the Warriors. The Warriors actually have that 04 Pistons synergy with 72 win Bulls talent level. You know what I mean? At the same time. So that's where, when you add these pieces around the edges there, like even Otto Porter Jr. or Gary Payton II, their roles are so defined and so specific that they can just, do that in their sleep. You know what I mean? Because they're not doing the heavy lifting. Just come in, knock down threes, and play defense. They're like, yeah, I can do that. And then when you have those guys who take those roles, they take their assignments with the vigor of a superstar, being like, oh, if I play 15 minutes tonight, it's going to be the best damn 15 minutes you've ever seen in your life. And now out of that, you get development like Jordan Poole becoming like a max contract player. So I really love just the synergy and the environment that the Warriors have created. And we saw, I guess we would say that first, death year we had when Steph and Clay were out, and we had Kai Bowman in there, and Draymond out there, going through the motions with those guys, and it was really hard to watch, right? But there was a certain part of us in the back of our brains like, we can use this. There's going to be a couple guys in here. I thought it was Eric Pascal. I don't know why I thought that was. I thought he was the guy, but he was pretty good, right? But to see Poole come out of that, and we've got Wiggins, to see him develop out of that, once their roles got more defined with the big three next to them, now you're seeing Wiggins exploding, for 9 rebounds. Like, was he known as a rebounder before he came to work? I didn't think so. But now he's like, hey, play defense, knock down threes, rebound. I can do that. I love how Steve Kerr puts his guys in position to do what they do best. And I feel like he doesn't get enough credit for that.
Yeah, well, like you're saying, though, his philosophy is like, it's just smacks you right in the face all the time. Like, it's because it's like overly complicated, it's like when I write like an overly flowery article, it's just, it's not for everyone. And I think that with the Warriors team, and this is one of the things about his philosophy is he thinks that moving the ball around a lot more keeps guys like Gary Payton or, JTA had an off year, or Bielicha, it keeps these guys more dialed in, more involved. And it allows people like Gary Payton, who maybe had a hard time finding a spot in the league as some sort of off the ball threat or an off the dribble creator. That's not really his role. He really is like a big man in a small guy's body. And the Kerr free-flowing offense system and defense is set up to allow people like that to thrive, not just to like be able to stay on the court and not sabotage the team, but it really is to like maximize them. And sometimes it does come at the expense of a guy like Stephen Curry, who, a lot of times you could just say, why aren't you spamming the pick and roll? It's definitely your most lethal attack. But, the team averaged like 116 points per 100 possessions last night. Like, they destroyed the Nuggets, and the Nuggets are just a medium defense anyways. They're not an elite defense. But when it works, there's a lot of sort of synergies that you don't get from just the James Harden spam the pick and roll attack. And that's always there. Kerr has shown before that he'll go to that with Kevin Durant or Steph, or even now, especially with Poole, the non-Curry minutes tend to lean a little heavier on the pick and roll than the rest of the offense does. It's all working though. So, I get that it's not for everyone, but, Bill Wennington, Kayvon Looney, these guys are going to go down in the history books as people who were valued members of a team, and basketball is a team sport.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, it's definitely for me. I would say I love the way they play. I've loved the way throughout the whole dynasty they've tried to play as a team, and essentially what you have is a system that elevates the whole, everyone in the system really, so that you've got basically a team that is greater than the sum of its parts. And actually, it is, so Steph isn't spamming pick and roll 100 times a game, but they do it. They do like it. Yes, they did the Steph and KD pick and roll, but before that was the Steph and Draymond Green pick and roll. And you'll see that again in this playoffs when it really gets down. That's the play that they'll probably go to. But, it's because you've got Steph and you've got Draymond Green on the other end that you can have this system. It's all based on maximizing that. And I don't know, it just, when I look at these other players, Steph makes it look so easy, right? But you look at why is Damian Lillard not on the level, or why is James Harden not on the level? It's because they can't do. It's the combination of the off ball and the on ball that he brings that just like destroys teams, and you can't really game plan for it properly. And similarly on the other end, like Draymond Green is such a unique talent. They've found a system to really elevate those talents, but then use those talents to elevate everyone else. And I think, so all these players, and in fact, there's a point you've made before, Daniel, that people get better when they play for the Warriors. And as you were saying, they have such defined roles now in this team that it just really works. And there was an interesting thing that Steve Kerr said about that earlier in the season, where he basically said, you don't have role players on bad teams. You just have players that aren't that good, basically. But on a good team, you focus in on what it is you can really do to help you win, and you do it. And I mean, I think the philosophy is it's led to 5 straight finals. It's led to 3 titles. It's led to, would have been, could have been a couple more titles, and if one had happened with all the other things have happened, obviously, but there's certainly 2019, if Clay hadn't gone down, the first time when he had the calf strain, then they wouldn't have had those two home games where they basically had no Clay. Well, they had no Clay in the first game 3, and then a hobbled Clay in game 4. They wouldn't have been going back 3-1 down. So it's like it all comes, to me, like just this season, it all comes back to health, and that's the thing. If those guys remain healthy, then like certainly in the West, I'm slightly more generous to the Grizzlies because I do feel they've given the Warriors problems mainly because the Warriors' carelessness with the ball, which has always been their Achilles heel. But if they defeat the mighty Minnesota Timberwolves in their first round series and start their dynastic ambitions, I think experience counts in the playoffs, and that is where the Warriors will kind of have an edge. But yeah, the Suns, going back to last season when they had the 15-5 run, which was part of the reason why I was high on them this season, because I'd seen what basically they're just, all right, Stephen Draymond, pieces that fit, let's just run with that. Forget about doing anything else, trying to get too clever with it. Let's go back to what works, which is this system, which is this kind of really democratic, collective way of playing a team sport, but that elevates the individual within it. It's beautiful to see. But yeah, going back to then, they beat the Suns in that run-in. Then they beat them twice in the regular season this season. Then they almost beat them when Steph Curry wasn't even playing. And it's like, I'm supposed to be, and their leader is Chris Paul, of noted playoff history. So really, I'm supposed to be scared of that? I don't know. I just when you go back to who's got the track record of delivering when it counts, it's the Golden State Warriors. It's Steph Curry, it's Klay Thompson, it's Draymond Green, and it probably is a bit Steve Kerr as well. People give him a hard time, but then success brings hate as well as love. So there you go.
Well, just real quick follow up from an earlier comment. So looking at synergy, the Warriors and Nuggets both had the same number of possessions, right? They had 106 possessions, more or less, according to synergy. The pick and roll, both teams are about a third of their offense. The Warriors ran 23 of the plays as pick and roll with a ball handler, and Denver had 29. So 29 versus 23, so 6 more plays. The big difference is if the defense commits, right? This is where the Kerr offense sort of thrives, right? So out of those 23 pick and roll ball handler plays, when the defense commits, it's only 9. So generally, if the defense goes and commits to the ball handler, they generally pass it away, right? The Nuggets are 19 compared to the Warriors 9 when the defense commits on the pick and roll. So they're more committed to making it work no matter what. So once you initiate the pick and roll, keep punching it. And I think that's a big difference in the Kerr philosophy, is that they'll try it, and if it's not there, they don't push it.
But that feels right.
Good.
That feels right? Because Mike D'Antoni, you talked about Daniel, you referenced the Suns earlier. We've talked about James Harden. D'Antoni's whole philosophy was just pick and roll, pick and roll, pick and roll, pick and roll. And none of his teams have won a title. But the point guards have got unbelievable numbers. Like the franchise leader, franchise record for the Knicks in NBA history for most assists in a game was Chris Duhon, 22 assists, and that was spamming pick and roll with David Lee in one of those lost seasons while they were tanking for LeBron. That's what he does. And so now you've got James Harden, his numbers have been inflated by this. You put him in a real situation, and we all know what happens there. So but yeah,
in order to win that way, you need players like LeBron and Kyrie. You know what I mean? You need guys like Kyrie, the greatest of all time, to do this, to run that. And I think we saw with that 2016 season, it was like, oh my gosh, they're actually going to spam the pick and roll every time, and it's going to be hellacious to guard because they have so many shooters. And then if you, for any reason, make any laps at all with those guys, they're going to punish you with like devastating shots. And they're just supreme shot makers. And I think that's where Chris Paul, and for historically throughout his career, you can put him in that tier of, being guys who can punish you so badly with those simple actions. But what we've seen is the Warriors, with their bend but don't break defensive mentality, they will give you so many opportunities, it seems like, to lull you to sleep. And in the fourth quarter, these adjustments fly over, where now they're trapping it, and now they're switching it a different way, or now they're dropping it differently. And we see time and time again that Chris Paul's, I would say, his smaller stature makes it harder to get around those adjustments because the Warriors are so long. And so now it's like, it's the fourth quarter, your hamstrings are on fire. Okay, now score 60 straight at the pick and roll. If you beat us that way, you beat us. And it's like, that's pretty hard for anybody to do, especially for Chris Paul to do. So there's for me, there's a understanding that eventually it's going to come down to Chris Paul trying to beat us with the pick and roll. And we've seen him fail so many times that I'm like, please run it. That'd be great. Thank you.
Well,
sorry, go
on. I always think of Bart Guy. And for people who don't know the story, me and Daniel and Nate were all going to a game together. I think it was the Rockets at that point. They were maybe up on the series. Maybe we're going into game 6 or something. It was getting a little bit puckering. It was a little bit tight. And we saw this dude just decked out head to toe, like Warrior headband, hat, Warriors socks, Steph Curry shoes, everything, like a lanyard, Warriors lanyard, like everything Warriors. And we asked him if he was worried at all. And he was like, nah, we're just one blown Chris Paul hamstring away. And the thing about Chris Paul, and, Steve Kerr even gave him like a little bit of shade, because he was like, as good as the Suns have been, it's almost disrespectful to say that it's wide open. It's not disrespectful. It's almost disrespectful, because I think everybody who is sort of outside of the Suns fan zone understands it's a very good regular season team, but you're going to need to make other teams be afraid of you. You need to really dominate some teams in the playoffs. The Warriors in their game 1 came out and dominated, and granted, the 6th seed Denver Nuggets without 2 of their main guys isn't the competition that you're really aiming to beat, as like send a message. But getting out of the West seems extremely realistic for this team. And I think that goes a long way towards sort of proving everything, right? I mean, and it's like Patrick was saying earlier, sure, if they flame out, if they do a non-injury flame out of the postseason, then it's like, well, maybe then you need to look at stuff. But for right now, the proof of concept seems to be there enough to where they've sort of proven themselves and proven their model is viable.
The Warriors have got different gears they can go to. I think Kuminga, when you get to the Suns, when you get to the Grizzlies, I think you're going to see more of him and less of Bjelica. If you start that, at some point you're probably going to start Steph Clay and Jordan Poole, and that relegates Looney to being the second, the backup center, which creates more minutes on the wing. So I think, it's just what excites me about this team is the multitude of different ways they can beat you, and I just think it's hard to see, and I'm not just saying this now after yesterday's win. I've been saying it in the Slack, I think, for a while, even when they were losing all their games when people weren't healthy. Like if they're healthy, I have a hard time picking against them coming out of the West. Now, the East, there's a couple of teams out there that will give them some interesting matchups. Of course, the one thing the Warriors will have is home court advantage against every single team in the East. These trashy Warriors that were like awful and Bob Myers should be fired, better record than every other team in the East, except Miami, where they got the same record, but they still managed to beat them in Miami without Steph Curry. Let's take a minute to appreciate what this team has actually managed to do this season so far and what is ahead of them. Because if health is the issue, you can say that about any team, as we were saying. Indeed, a point I think, Daniel, you made very eloquently last time we were speaking. You say that about any team, but also this isn't the end. This isn't the only shot they've got. They've still got a couple of seasons after this as well, where those guys can realistically still be pretty good. And all those young players, Poole, Kuminga, Moody came on really well. Who the hell knows what we're going to get out of James Wiseman at some point? Maybe nothing, maybe not. But yeah, they're actually in a really good spot. And it just, one thing for me that I found quite interesting about all the, going back to the two timelines thing. There's an article I wrote back at Forbes. Basically, the instructor parallel for me is not a basketball parallel. So in the UK, there's like a really famous parallel of doing this, where Manchester United, after winning the title a couple of times, the Premier League title, they lost it one year, and so they basically sold off some of their veteran players, and they didn't buy anyone. They just handed it over to these kids. They lost on the opening day of the season. One of the main pundits on the shows, the equivalent of, I don't know, Kenny Smith or Charles Barkley, Alan Hansen said, you won't win anything with kids. You never win anything with kids. Those kids were like David Beckham and all of that generation that basically Man United like dominated British English football for like a decade afterwards, And that's the thing, like if the kids are good enough and the veterans who you've got left are good enough, then actually it can really pay off. And you've got to be really careful about just giving that up. So yeah, let's see. Health this season is, that's going to be what drives them. But like they've got a window for a few more years after this that is pretty exciting. And the parity around the league is kind of like 1970s level at the moment. No super team, anyone could win it. Anyone probably will win it. It's going to be who's healthiest at the end of the day. And that's kind of what it was last season. Milwaukee and Phoenix were the two healthiest teams, although both had their injury concerns but in a playoffs, it was really injury ridden. And they matched up in the finals. Let's see.
It's funny how so long ago we felt so much disrespect from LeBron when he said the Warriors are the healthiest team I've ever seen. And now you look back on it, you're like, you know what? Health does play a pretty huge role. It just felt like when it was our time to shine, everyone was too quick to point to that. But it's true. I'm sure even Klay Thompson will say that now, like injury luck matters so much. So we've been humbled. And that's fine. It's fine. We can't win every single year. Sure. Okay, we get it. But now we might start bringing that back a little bit. Might be time to go off on another rip of 5 straight finals trips, especially considering the fact that, like, the next generation of hoopers, like I'm looking at the Rockets, looking at Cleveland, nice young talent, very interesting teams there. Even Minnesota, nice young talent there. I'm not scared of any of them. I would take our young talent versus their young talent any day of the week, and they don't have a proven core 3 on top of it. So either way you slice it, I think this is by far the best win now team and future win team. And so Bob Myers should get a statue. He should get a statue at some point. He should get his suit raised in the rafters at one point. Thank you, Bob Myers, for giving us that. Okay, so when we get out of here, it's been like an hour so far. And we got a lot to do today. Real quick, what are your predictions for this series?
Well, I took Warriors in 5 in my preview. I'm still feeling pretty good about that, obviously, with the big win. I just really don't think that Denver matches up that well with us. Between Draymond and Looney, you can't count on Jokic carrying your team and leading every major category efficiently. I think he probably did that last night, but I don't know how efficient he was. And the problem with them is going to be the rest of their roster too. Like Austin Rivers isn't going to give you the Jordan Poole energy. Like I don't, Bones Highland, like I don't know exactly who on the Nuggets is going to help that team come together in a way that they didn't show in the first game. So I feel pretty good about Warriors in 5, and I'm going to stay with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the thing for me is they just don't have the perimeter defenders to stop Steph, Clay, and Poole. And like, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, all of that, Steph is able to play more than 21 minutes off the bench, and what you can do then. Game 2s are always more difficult, going on the road is always a bit more difficult, especially in Denver. But like, I can't see them getting more than one game, to be honest.
I agree. In fact, I think it's probably something where, the vets in the team, I'm sure probably Steve Kerr are going to push for a sweep. I'm pretty sure they want to instill that killer instinct in their new guys. Back in the day, the Warriors were all about sweeping teams immediately to get them out the way. And it would be a shame if these young kids don't learn what it's like to just go in that 4th game on the road and just end someone's season in front of their fans. Like those are the things that make you into a dynasty and make you feared. And I think Jordan Poole has that killer instinct that at Bloodlust, he seems to love that moment. And so it'd be great for guys like Wiggins to taste that too. Like, I mean, those are really like camaraderie building, chemistry building moments when it's like, okay, guys, this team has one more game to play and they don't want to lose in front of their fans. How do we get them out of here? Some of the hardest games to finish off. And so if we can see, Andrew Wiggins get an explosion that night, I mean, those are things that build your character. When you go on to face a Memphis, maybe, or whoever it is, you have that taste for blood. So I'm hoping for a sweep straight across the board. And I would love for it to be led by one of the young guys, you know what I mean? Like a Poole or a Kuminga or something like that, just to show the mighty Warriors are back.